This video is a discussion about a cognitive bias called the IKEA effect and its impact on Warhammer. So the term IKEA effect is a cognitive bias described in a 2011 article, The IKEA Effect When Labor Leads to Love, that was published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology. I'm going to read the abstract from the study and describe some of the experiments and conclusions before launching into a discussion of how this impacts wargaming and Warhammer. So, in 4 studies in which consumers assembled IKEA boxes, folded origami, and built sets of Legos, we demonstrate and investigate boundary conditions for the IKEA effect, the increase in valuation of self-made products. Participants saw their amateurish creations as similar in value to the experts' creations and expected others to share their opinions. We show that labor leads to love only when labor results in successful completion of tasks. When participants built and then destroyed their creations or failed to complete them, the IKEA effect dissipated. Finally, we show that the labor increases valuations for both do-it-yourselfers and novices. So in the introduction of the article, the authors write that examples instead suggest that when people imbue products with their own labor, their effort can increase their valuation. We suggest that labor alone can be sufficient to induce greater liking for the fruits of one's labor. Even constructing a standard bureau, an arduous, solitary task, can lead people to overvalue their often poorly constructed creations. We call this phenomenon the IKEA effect, in honor of the Swedish manufacturer whose products typically arrive with some assembly required. So also, just as completing tasks has a positive psychological feedback, failing to complete tasks has adverse consequences. People ruminate more on tasks that they fail to complete, leading to negative effect and regret. So the study follows 3 different experiments involving building and sometimes deconstructing the same object, and several steps where participants would then value and bid on the object that they and others had built. So the first experiment involved one group that assembled like an IKEA box, and the second group that was simply told to value a pre-assembled box. Now the results of that first experiment were such that the first group that assembled the box were willing to pay a 64% premium compared to the pre-assembled group. A second experiment had one group of participants create an origami frog, crane, and then dog, and then kind of place the value on their finished products. Now, true origami experts also created the same product, and another group of participants were asked to kind of value both of those finished products. These are simply pieces of folded paper. So the bids are obviously not high, just 20, 30 cents. But those that built their own origami valued their product at 5 times greater than the independent group. So other experiments involved building and then disassembling 10 to 12 pieces of Lego sets to create kind of a bird, dog, or duck. These experiments established the role of task completion in the emergence of the IKEA effect. So I'm going to read just some of the basic conclusions from the study. In 4 experiments, we demonstrated the existence and magnitude of the IKEA effect, which occurs for both utilitarian and hedonic principles. This is important because the use or pleasure derived could change the outcome. And I'll continue reading. It is sufficient in magnitude that consumers believe that their self-made products rival those of experts. And then a little further it reads, adding to previous literature on effort justification, we also show that Successful completion is an essential component to the link between labor and likening to emerge. Participants who built and then unbuilt their creations were not permitted to finish those creations did not show an increase in willingness to pay. In addition, by using IKEA boxes and Lego sets, did not permit customization, we demonstrated that the IKEA effect does not arise solely as a result of the participants' idiosyncratic tailoring of their creations to their preferences. These 2 points strike me as important to the brand at Games Workshop. The challenge of marketers lies in convincing consumers to engage in the kinds of labor that will lead them to value products more highly. At the same time, however, companies should be careful to create tasks that are too difficult as to lead to an inability to complete the task. Again, our results demonstrate that labor leads to love only when labor is successful. And I'm thinking of this point about tutorials like those in Warhammer TV can kind of lend themselves to helping that finish through. So finally, the article writes, we note that we used generally small ticket items. The question of whether the IKEA effect occurs with more expensive items is important, both practically and theoretically. While future research should empirically examine the magnitude of overevaluation as a function of price, we should suggest that even for very costly items, people may continue to see the products of their labor as more valuable than others do. Now, they're specifically thinking here about like home renovations and home updates, but I think most of us would say this hobby is fairly expensive, so I think they've proved their point here in our hobby. Several other published precursors to the study were also referenced. I'll note these 3 because I think they're important. It was previously established that greater time spent touching objects can increase the feeling of ownership and value. And consumers are willing to pay a premium for products that they have customized to their idiosyncratic preferences. And finally, there's also a phenomenon called effort justification. It was actually referenced a little earlier, where the more effort people put into the same pursuit, the more they come to enjoy it. All right, an interesting study. Now, modern psychology is undergoing kind of a replication crisis, but I'm fairly certain that this type of study is proved every second you are immersed in a hobby like tabletop wargaming. It should be obvious to us that this type of study is speaking kind of directly to the attractiveness of this hobby, where we routinely assemble models, then spend more time and effort painting those models, and then we finally get to experience the life and narrative that those models have on the battlefield. The IKEA effect is basically the business model of Games Workshop, and it is precisely why a niche market can turn remarkable profits and develop a strong and loyal following that can last many years. So think of all the implications for this type of study and the impact of the IKEA effect on our hobby. Price. Just as in the experiment, I think we are willing to pay a premium on models because we can foresee the value that we will gain by assembling, painting, and gaming with that model. I can visually anticipate how much I will enjoy that model. There are quite literally thousands of that same model on tables around the world, but that one, right there on the tabletop is mine. I built it, I painted it, it tells my story. And there are many things in this world that I do not like to spend money on at all. I'm quite stingy in many regards, but I rarely feel that sense of hesitation when looking at the price of a model. It's a different mental schema for me. So unfinished projects or broken models. Unfinished projects are a problem, and they do not feel as valuable as the ones where you have really made the effort. So likewise, kind of a broken model is just simply tragic, and it cannot be sufficiently. And if it cannot be sufficiently repaired, it really there's really some doubt about its perceived value. What about finished models? That sense of accomplishment when the project is finished, when you've assembled it, it's painted, it's beautiful. That's truly amazing. Posting those fresh pictures on Twitter, Instagram, or putting it on the table for the first time and receiving those positive compliments, that feels good. Right? That is a type of hobby drug, and there's a real sense of commitment and really kind of a spike and low. You need to keep hitting that high repeatedly. Conversions. I do not do a lot of conversions myself, but I can absolutely understand the appeal of customization and making the model unique and truly yours. Again, something striking that others have not seen, and it distinguishes your model from the thousands of others. Perhaps an interesting discussion here could surround kind of model kits that have become more advanced while built-in customization has declined. This is a current trend. So that the recent generations of models have been more fluid and dynamic in their posing, but they're more static insofar as there's less options for changing arms and legs than there were in the past. Still plenty of head and weapon options remain, but the kind of the balance between the stock market and choice seems to be a true fine balance beam for Games Workshop. So painting I view similar to conversions. You are putting an enormous effort and time into the model, and perhaps you have decided to select your own unique paint scheme, different from all the army books and codexes. That is enormously empowering, as it really makes the model yours again, and that personal evaluation of that work in the model really skyrockets. Now, both converting and painting are kind of the best examples of the IKEA effect to some extent, because the value is generally magnified in that individual. But unless it is, truly stellar work, like it is legitimately pro-painted or just really beautiful conversion work, it tends to be diminished in the eyes of other people on the secondary market. So when I'm looking at eBay, looking for models, I avoid conversions and painted models. I suppose it's specifically because I want to reap the benefits of that work. Right? I want to convert them. I want to paint them. I don't want the work of someone else. I don't value that as highly. Indeed, often they really don't sell as well as just raw, unassembled models. So what about those that love to create a narrative for their models? I'm thinking here about establishing unit names, new rules where you can customize and create new characters, like in some of the new books, Path to Glory perhaps, and other linked narrative games. Now, these are strategies that will surely only further increase that sense of values as the models take on an identity and a history. They become that Sergeant Crassus or what have you, right? Like they really truly do take on a personality. Now, I think the IKEA effect is precisely why you will not see a wide range of pre-painted models produced by Games Workshop. I will not say never, but they are likely to be sporadic and limited if they ever do exist. I'm thinking here of the only exception I can think of is like Games Workshop has put out large-scale action figures, both in more recent history, but also those in the past. Some of those have been pre-painted. Others more recently have and have not been. But it would seem to be counterintuitive to the business model, the general company brand, and it would undermine the IKEA effect if pre-painted models were rolled out in scale. Now you would have to dramatically increase the player base and the size of the consumer base in order to make that work, because it's just a simple matter that if you're going to value the product less, you just need a lot more people, because presumably that would also decrease the potential value of the models. It's just something to really consider. And I don't know if the tabletop wargaming itself has enough of a scaling potential there. So what about snap fit models? Those are increasingly common in the starter sets and in kits designed to reach beginners and a large audience. Well, I think they're just at the right level of complexity. Basically, no room for customization, but they would give someone just the slightest whiff of the IKEA effect. Remember that the study found that just assembling a basic box increased its perceived value by 62%. And one of the examples used in the study was that instant cake boxes were introduced in the 1950s, and they were perceived by consumers as being too simple. They weren't popular. And so manufacturers made it just slightly more complex. Right? They changed the recipe so that it's still powdered ingredients, but you had to add an egg. Okay, that's it. That simple gesture was enough to hook the consumers and to kind of increase the product's popularity. It felt like you were doing something. Now, snap fit models are that egg, right? A box of pre-assembled models, heaven forbid, pre-painted models, would not trigger the IKEA effect. But simply assembling models that are just one or two pieces will, to some extent. And that simple task is the lure to something greater, right? I doubt you're going to see easy to build, that's what they kind of styled, regular boxes, right? They are generally kind of the initial starter box and then maybe one or two accessory type boxes. But once you get into the broad range of regular models, that doesn't exist. And it's probably also, I'm just thinking off my head here, old metal models, that were often just one piece, like I'm thinking characters, they would not be triggering the same effect. Obviously, you're still painting them, you're still creating the narrative. But those would not have the same impact as the current plastic sprues for individual characters that are, 6, 7 pieces. So that's an interesting development. It also allows for greater customization. But that simple task of assembling one or two models just lends itself to the purchase of the next box that has greater complexity. So I hope you found this video interesting. As always, thank you for watching. Please consider supporting the channel by commenting on the video, hitting that like button, and subscribing for more content. See you in the next video.